What we're looking at in Chapter 4 is decision structures. This is what allows you to make choices as you're going through your code. So instead of going straight through as we have previously, we're going to come to a point where we need to decide, do we want to follow a certain branch of logic or do another branch of logic depending on a certain condition. There are different types of decision structures that you can put together. What I'd like to look at with you today is the in the spotlight multiple nested decision structures. This gives us a choice of looking at a series of conditions. So if you'll take a look at that in Chapter 4 of your text, you'll see that we have Dr. Suarez, who teaches a literature class and uses the following 10-point grading scale. And it's just the standard 10-point grading scale. 90 and above it is an A, 80 to 89 a B, and so on. So he's asked you to write a program that's going to allow a student to enter a test score and then display the grade for that score. And you'll see that someone has already put an algorithm together for you. Remember, the algorithm is just simply a way of writing down, not in code or anything, but just writing down our thoughts on how we're going to address this problem. So what we need to do first is ask the user to enter a test score. So right there's our input. So we need to know what our inputs are. We're going to ask the user to enter a test score. Second, we need to determine the grade. When we determine the grade, this is going to be our processing. And you'll see as we determine the grade, we're going to look at different conditions. So if the score is greater than or equal to 90, then we're going to output an A. So here's our output for the program. Else, if the score is greater than or equal to 80, then the grade is a B, and so on. So you'll see that before we're even jumping into coding, we're trying to figure out how are we going to approach this problem. And you do that just by making notes on paper and thinking through what are your inputs, what processing has to occur, what are the outputs, and just write that down how it's going to happen step by step. Okay. In the last chapter, we talked about modularization, so we're going to look at that with this problem too. But first of all, I want to show you how we could approach this just using Python, and you'll see that there is an example that's in the text. So let me pull that example up on the screen for you here. And this is the example that you'll see. So we have some comments. Again, remember these comments are not up to the standards that I'm asking you to use whenever you're submitting assignments, but there are some comments here that are telling us what's going on. So here we have the program gets a numeric test score from the user and displays the corresponding letter grade. You'll see that in this case there are some constants set up. Remember that constants are something that we're going to use in our program. They have a particular set value, and you're not going to change that value any place within the program. By defining our constants like this and putting them up at the very top of our program code, if at some point we decide that we're going to change what defines an A, a B, a C, or so on, all we need to do is come in here and make changes to our constants. So we don't have to be going in and messing around with what we're doing with our grades and the logic. All we need to do up here is just change the constants, and then our logic is all going to be correct no matter what we put as our endpoints for the grades. Okay. Next, we have our main function. And in our main function, we're going to get the test score. So here we're having the user input the test score. Then we make our determination of the test score. So here's our logic that we had written down in our algorithm, and we've just translated into Python code. So we have if the score is greater than or equal to a score, which is 90, then we're going to print your grade is an A. Else, if the score is greater than or equal to a B score, which is 80, then we're going to print B, and so on, till we get down here to the end. If your score is greater than or equal to D score, which is 60, we want it to be a D. And notice we don't have to have an other else if. If we know that it's not an A, it's not a B, it's not a C, it's not a D, then the only alternative left is for it to be an F. So all we say is else, print your grade as an F. And then of course we need to call the main function down here at the end. Now if you keep looking past the example that we're looking at in your text and go over to the next page, you'll see that there is a different way that we can structure this logic that would do basically the same thing. When we structure something like this in Python, see how it keeps getting longer and longer out to the right? So if we were to keep going with even more complex decision structure, this could get really out of hand as far as moving over across the page and be a little bit hard to understand what's going on. So there is another structure that we can use. Instead of if, else, and then if, else, we can use the elif. So let me just show you what that would look like. So here I can just delete and bring my if up here. I want to be sure that I'm keeping things lined up. Okay. And I'm just going to go down through and keep changing my structure. And you'll notice I am lining things up here. The indentation is very important when you are doing Python, as it looks at the indentation to try to figure out what makes up a block of code. So we are almost there. Okay. So this is basically the same code, just written a little bit differently. You can see that this is easier to follow because we do have our block, and you can see, if the score is greater than or equal to a score or 90, we're going to print the A. Elif, which is the same as doing else and then an if on the following line, we're going to do if the score is greater than or equal to B, and so on. So just be aware when you're using Python that you do have options. If you're going to do a nested decision structure, you do have two different ways that you can put that together. Now this example is great as far as showing you how to do the decision structure, but remember in the previous chapter we did learn about modularization, and this has absolutely no modularization in it at all. And that's something that we really want to work at learning, because when you go out and you start working doing programming, if that's what you choose to pursue, when you write programs, you don't want to have huge modules that have all kinds of things going on in them. It's much, much better if you can break your code down into logical modules, with each module having a singular purpose. So what I'd like to do now is to go over to Word, and we're going to create a hierarchy chart and take a look at this and see how we can break it down so that we are using modules. And then we're going to take our hierarchy chart and we're going to implement that in Raptor. So what we're going to do is create a hierarchy chart. So I'm going to, in Word, add SmartArt, and we're going to do the same thing we did with the last one, just a hierarchy chart. It's going to be a basic hierarchy chart. And I am going to change the colors on this just so it's easier for you to see, and make this a bit bigger. And again, we don't need this level in here, so I'm just going to click on the edge of it, press my delete key on the keyboard. And here's our basic structure that we're going to use. Now, if I needed more modules, I can add more blocks to this, but I think this is going to work for our purposes today. So we always start out with a main module. And then if we look back at our algorithm, what was the first thing we needed to do? We needed to get input, so we needed to get that test score. So let's just call it get test score. And as I'm naming these, notice that get test score, there's a verb there. We're telling what we're going to do. Modules always do something. So always try to use a verb. And you'll notice that I'm also using camel casing. That first letter is going to be lowercase, and then the other words that are in the name, I'm using uppercase for each one of those. So get test score. Next thing I need to do is I need to figure out what the grade is. So let's call this determine grade. You'll also notice I'm putting parentheses in after these. When we're doing modules, we're always going to use the parentheses because that's where we're going to show what the arguments are, what we're going to have to pass into or back out of these various modules. And then last one, we need to print the grade. Let's call it output grade. Okay. So now that we know what our modules are, let's take a look at what we do need to pass back and forth. So we're going to start in main. We're going to call get test score. Now get test score, it's going to need to pass a score back. So let's put in score. That's a very descriptive name for what we're working with. So main is going to call get test score, and get test score is going to get the score from the user and pass that back up to main. So what I would like you to do is define variables in main, and then we are going to pass those as arguments down into our various modules, and those will be called procedures when we're working in Raptor. So when we define those procedures, that's what we will set in here as our parameters. So score would actually be defined up here in main. We would pass it down to get test score. It would be empty when we send it down there. Get test score, the user's going to enter a score, and then that will come back up to main. Now when we determine grade, we're going to have to pass the score in, and then we want to get the grade back. So the score comes in, we figure out the grade, we pass the grade back up to main, and then if we want to output the grade, we're going to have to send grade down here to output grade. So again, we've spent time planning on the front end. We're thinking through how are we going to structure all of this. We're going to have our main module. We're going to have our 3 modules down here. We've thought through what are the variables that we're going to use. We've even determined the names that we're going to use. So now when we go over to Raptor, this should be very easy for us to put together. So let's go ahead and go to Raptor. And remember, when I get to Raptor, one of the first things that I do want to do is put in my comments. So again, this is helping me think through what I'm going to do. So I am going to right-click and add my comment. And remember, we always put in your name. And then this is Chapter 4, Exercise 4.6. And then tell what the purpose of this program is that we're working on. So this program requests a test score from the user The letter grade is then determined and output. Okay, and you'll remember that I also would like for you to document, oops, let me get this in the right place here. I would also like you to document any of the variables that you're using, or constants for that matter. So here we're going to say that we're going to create an integer and we'll call it score. And this is going to be the test score as entered by the user. And we're also going to have a string, which is the grade. And this is going to be the letter grade as determined by the grade point ranges. Now, when we looked at what we were doing in Python, we used the constants there for the endpoints for the grades. We're going to just assume for the purposes that we're doing here that we're going to always have the same letter grades. We're at an institution where that's set in stone. We've never changed it. We don't ever plan on changing it. So I'm not going to use constants here, but know that that is an option that you have. And it's one of those things where you just need to think through it and determine what the best way is to approach it. And you may determine that you do need to use constants, or maybe you decide that you don't. The major way that you would decide is if this is something that could possibly change in the future, and it would be easier to change the values just by changing the value of a constant than having to go down and make changes in the logic within the code itself. So here is, and I need to go ahead and save this. So I'm just going to save it as program 4.6. And I have my comments. Now let's take a look at what we need to start doing. Whenever we do have variables that we're using, that's always going to be done first. In fact, in some programming languages, you must do this first. And it just makes sense anyway to be able to define things before we're going to start using them. So we need a couple assignment symbols in here. And I am first going to set up my score. And this is an integer, so I'm going to initialize it to a value of 0. And then I also have my grade. And this is a string, and I'm going to initialize it to a null string, which is just double quotes with nothing in between. So I have double quote, double quote. Now the next thing I'm going to do is if I look back here at my hierarchy chart, I want to be able to get the test score. So I'm going to have to call this and pass score to it. But before I can call something, I have to actually create it. So I'm going to right click, and remember, to be able to create our procedures, you do have to have your mode set to intermediate. So if you're right clicking and you're not seeing the option available to create a procedure, it could be that you don't have your mode set to intermediate. So I'm going to right click on the main tab and add procedure. And the procedure that I'm going to add, and if I look back here at Word, it's going to be get test score, and we're going to have a parameter score. So get test score, and we're going to pass to that score, and actually we're going to pass it in. We're going to have the user enter a value, and then we need to get that value back to main. So this is going to be input and output. So we'll click OK. And what we need to do in here is we need to get that input. So I'm going to add an input symbol. And my prompt, I'm going to say, enter your test score. And I want them to enter that into score. And let me just put a colon in here, make my prompt look a little bit nicer. So there's enter your test score. And what did I forget here? Remember, we need to comment everything. So I have not added a comment yet. So I'm going to right click and add my comment. And I do generally like to do this first. I just happened to forget to do it this time. So request a test score from the user. And there's my comment. So I have this procedure done. I can go back to main, and now I can put in my call. So I'm going to call, and it's called, I'm going to move this out of the way so I can see, get test score. And you'll see as I'm typing it in, it's matching up and showing up down here, and it shows me in-out score. And remember, I don't have to put in the in-out. All I have to put in is the actual name. So I'm passing score and OK. So get test score and score. Now if I go back again to my hierarchy chart, the next thing I need to do is determine the grade. So we're going to create the determine grade procedure. So back to Raptor and add procedure. And this one is going to be called determine grade. And the parameters that we need to set up here are score and grade. Score we're passing in. Do we need to send score back? No, we're not going to change score within determine grade. We're just passing it in so we know what the grade is to help us with the logic in determining what the actual grade is. But now grade we're going to pass in as that null, and then we're going to need to get it back because we're going to go through the logic and determine whether the grade is A, B, C, D, or F, and be able to set this and send it back to main. So grade is going to be input and output. Score is only going to be input. Click OK, and let's go ahead and do our comments here before I forget about it. So we are going to determine the letter, not ladder, letter grade. And I'm just pressing enter so that this doesn't get to be a huge long comment. So we're going to determine the letter grade based on the score input by the user utilizing a 10-point grade scale. Okay. Now this is where we have all of our logic figured out already. Remember, we have that algorithm that's back in your text. So we're going to start out looking at, I'm going to put in a selection symbol here. We're going to have to determine whether the score is greater than or equal to 90. So if I double click, and here I'm going to need to put in what my condition is. And you'll see examples of conditions. So it's generally the variable and then some sort of comparison, and then what we want to compare it to. So what we have is our score. The comparison that we're doing is greater than or equal, and what we're comparing it to is 90. Now this is where if we had been using the constants, you would put the constant name in instead. But as I said, in this we've determined for this organization that we are not going to ever change the way we're doing grading. It's always going to be 70, 80, 90, and so on. So we're going to just type in the literal 90. So we're looking at score greater than or equal to 90. Now I want you to notice here, I could have done this with everything all right up against each other, but I've put spaces in here, and that just helps the readability. So that's something that I would like to see you do. So we're going to click Done. Now you'll notice this is structured a little bit differently than what you saw in the example in the text, in that the yes and no are reversed. It's working the same way. It just happens that if this is true, our branch is going to go over here to the right, and if it's false, we're going, I'm sorry, to the left, and if it's false, we're going to go over here to the right. So what we want to do is look at if this is true, what do we want to have happen? If the score is greater than or equal to 90, we know then that the letter grade is going to be an A. So we want to do an assignment statement, and we are going to say that grade is going to be an A. And notice that I am using the double quotes around this. It is a string. So we're going to put in an A, and we have to use the double quotes. So done, and you'll see that grade is going to be assigned the letter A. Now if this is not true, if it's false, what are we going to do? Well, then we need to find out it's not an A, what is it? So we're going to have to put some more logic in here to look at the decision that we need to make next, and that decision is the score greater than or equal to 80? So if the score is greater than or equal to 80, then we know, and I'm putting in an assignment symbol here, that the grade is a B. If the score is not greater than or equal to 80, we still don't know exactly what it is, so we need to keep looking at it. So we need to make another decision. We need to say, is the score greater than or equal to a 70? And again, this is something that we've worked out on paper in our algorithm before we actually come in here and start doing this. So I'm not just making this up out of my head. This is based on the algorithm we created. So if the score is greater than or equal to 70, what are we doing? We know that that then is a C. And we are almost there. If it's not greater than or equal to 70, then is the score greater than or equal to 60? If the score is greater than or equal to 60, then we know that the grade is a D. And let me just slide this over a little bit so we can see what we're doing here. Now we don't need any more logic. At this point we know the grade is not an A, it's not a B, it's not a C, it's not a D, so the only thing left that it could possibly be is an F. So here we just use another assignment symbol, put it over here, and the grade, oops, so I put in the uppercase G there. That's a different variable. This is case sensitive, so be sure I had to make it lowercase g, and the grade would be an F. Okay. Let me go ahead and save this just because we've done quite a bit of work here. And now I want to go back to main, and we need to call determine grade. So I need to call, and we are calling determine grade, and we have in is our score and out is our grade. Okay. Now, back to our hierarchy chart. Last thing we need to do is output grade. And you see that the parameter here for output grade is grade. So let's go back and get that added. So again, we need another procedure. And this one is going to be called output grade. And we are going to need to pass to it the grade. Now we're passing it in and we're going to print it, so we really don't need to send anything back. So this one is going to be just input. Remember, if you're trying to determine do things go in or just in and out, which do we need to choose? If you're sending something in making changes to it and you need to get it back to use later on, then you need to have it set as output also. For this, we're doing input only because we're just sending it in, we're printing it out, we're not making any changes to it. We don't need to get it back to main to be able to use it later on. So let's go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to right click and do my comment. And we're just going to say this is going to output the letter grade. And what I need to do is put in an output statement. And I'm going to use my double quotes, and I want to put some text in here that's going to describe what's being output. You don't ever want to output just a value. You always want to label it so that we know what it is that's being output. So I'm going to say your letter grade on the test is, now I want to put in a space, and then my double quotes. Otherwise, when I put in my variable, it would be right up against the letter S, and I want to be sure I have spacing in here. Then remember, the plus is our concatenation symbol. That's what's going to stick things together. So I can take my literal string here, your letter grade on the test is, and then I want to add on to that or concatenate to it what's in grade. And then I'm going to concatenate onto that a period, just so this looks like a regular sentence. So your letter grade is, within double quotes, I have my space here so things aren't going to be stuck right on to whatever the grade is. So it wouldn't say IS and then a capital A or a B or whatever. We want space in between. The plus is letting us add this little string, add on to that what's in the variable grade. So this would be our A, B, C, D, or F, and then we add on to that the literal, which contains the period. So it's going to say your letter grade is whatever the letter is, and then have a period at the end. So we're done with this. We need to go back to main, and then we're going to do a call to output grade, and we need to pass it grade. Okay. So I think we have this all put together now. Let's go ahead and test it. And before I do that, see how my comment is kind of overlapping my symbols here? I'm just going to click on it and I'm going to drag it over to the right a little bit just because that looks a little bit better. And let's go ahead and test. And you should always test multiple times and use different values to make sure that all of your logic is working properly. Think of ways that you can really test the system to see if there is something that maybe isn't working. So we're going to start out, and I'm going to step through this. Remember, I can just run it, and that would just blow through everything, and we can adjust the speed here of how quickly it goes. But I want to step through this with you so that we can see exactly what's happening. So we're going to do one step at a time. So we're going to initialize score, and you can always watch here on the left. It's going to show you what your variables are. So my score is set to 0. My grade is set to null. Now I'm calling get test score. So we should see a prompt coming up saying enter your test score, and here it is. And let's try this. Let's say the first score we're going to try is an 87. So we will click OK and keep moving through. So now our score is an 87 that got passed back into main. Grade is still not set. Keep going. We're going to go into determine grade. So determine grade, we're going to look at, here's our score of 87 that got passed into determine grade. So here's our score of 87 that's in determine grade. So is 87 greater than or equal to 90? No, it's not. Is 87 greater than or equal to 80? Yes, it is. So our logic's working so far. This says our grade's going to get set to a B. So let's see what happens. Your grade is being set to a B, and we'll keep going through. That ended. We didn't have to go through any more of our logic there. So now output grade, we're going to call that. So here we are in output grade. Put your letter grade on the test is, and you'll see here we are in output grade. We've passed just the grade to it. We didn't need to pass the score, just the grade. And we're outputting our grade, so here we go. We are at the end, and if we look over here at our master console, your letter grade on the test is B. So it looks like our logic worked so far. But you know, when we were over here going through determine grade, we only came part way down through, and it would be really good if we tested this with a value that's going to take us clear down through all of our logic and make sure it works. So let's try this with a really low test score. So I'm going to try it again, and we'll start walking through. So here we're initializing score, initializing grade. Those are initialized over here to the left. We're moving on down into get test score. So we can see we're in get test score, and our score is currently 0. Let's see. So someone did really poorly on this test. Let's say they got a 45. So okay. You see that we have our 45 in get test score. We're going to pass that back up into main. Our score there is still 0, but it's getting passed back. So now our score is 45. We haven't determined our grade yet, but that's what we're getting ready to do. So we're going into determine grade. In determine grade, we have our score of 45. So is 45 greater than or equal to 90? No. Is 45 greater than or equal to 80? No, it's not. Is score greater than or equal to 70? And you'll see our logic seems to be working absolutely fine so far. Is our score greater than or equal to 60? What's going to happen here? No, it's not. So our grade's going to get set to an F. So watch over here on the left. Our grade got set to an F. We're down at our end symbol. So we're going to come back through. We're going to output our grade. So we're coming up here. We're going to output the grade. We've passed the grade of F over to this procedure. So we keep going, and here goes our grade being output, and your letter grade on the test is F. So you can see that we've tested this with a couple of different values, and you may want to try some other ones just to make sure that you're understanding how it's working. And if you have fairly complicated logic, you do want to always be sure to try a variety of ways just to make sure that everything is working correctly. Well, I hope that by doing this, you're having an understanding not only of modules, which we had covered in the last chapter, but that you're seeing how we can use logic and really create programs which are going to allow us to solve much more complicated problems. Now, as we move on, we're going to learn about some other structures that we can use, and as we do these problems, we'll just keep combining them in different ways. I hope you're enjoying this. You know, I think it's fun just to see how we can take these problems and solve them creatively, and it's always fun to put something together and find out that it does work.